Christmas in my family was never about warmth or togetherness. It was about optics, precision, presentation. My mother, Cheryl, ran the holidays like a Fortune 500 executive chairing a shareholder meeting. Every aspect, from the color of the napkins to the order of who toasted first, was planned weeks in advance. My father, Warren, played his usual role, the polished figurehead who nodded, smiled, and deferred to his wife as though every decision was hers by divine right. This year, though, they added a twist. Christmas dinner at Bella Vita, the swankiest restaurant in the city. Crystal chandeliers, velvet-backed chairs, waiters who seemed trained, not just in hospitality but in subtle performance. The kind of place where everything sparkled, and so did the egos. Tyler, my older brother, was the reason for the upgrade. His recent promotion to regional director had gone to his head faster than champagne. He mentioned it at the valet, at the coat check, and again before the appetizers, each time louder, more proud, like he needed the room to know his net worth had grown by at least 4 digits. The seating arrangement, of course, said everything. My sister Melissa sat to my mother's right, the golden child, pediatrician, married to a neurosurgeon, wearing a Channel blazer like it was her second skin. Tyler was to my father's left, already waving the wine list like he was choosing investments, not Merlot. And me? I was at the far end of the table, wedged between the swinging kitchen door and a coat rack, seated beside my teenage cousin who was Snapchatting between courses. There were 16 of us, and somehow, I was closer to the emergency exit than to my own parents. No one asked how my year was. No one mentioned my promotion, modest, yes, but still earned, to communications director at the nonprofit I poured 5 years into. No one remembered I'd helped raise funds to provide meals to families this Christmas. Irony, I guess. The worst part wasn't the silence. It was when my mother turned to me with that cool, syrupy voice and said, "You didn't contribute much this year, Brooke," like it was a casual observation, like she was commenting on a weather report. Then she smiled that thin, diplomatic smile that never reached her eyes. "Let's try to keep the conversation centered on the ones who made this happen, okay?" It landed like a slap I was supposed to thank her for. The table fell into an awkward quiet, not out of shame, but out of habit. A few chuckled. My dad gave a small, automatic nod. Melissa avoided my eyes and reached for her water. Tyler smirked. I said nothing. I didn't trust my voice not to break. I had brought a bottle of Barolo, not cheap. Had it gift-wrapped at the shop, even wrote a handwritten card. I'd offered weeks ago to help with the planning, but was told it's under control. I worked overtime all month to afford a new dress that didn't look like I'd borrowed it from my high school reunion wardrobe. Still, I didn't contribute enough. As the waiter poured more wine I hadn't been offered, I forced a smile, my fingers tightening around the stem of my glass. This wasn't just a dinner, it was a reminder. In their eyes, I was still the one they didn't know how to label. Not a wife, not a mother, not a success by their standards. Just Brooke. And in that moment, it was as if I didn't exist at all. I sat still, hands folded in my lap, while the table roared around me, laughter, silverware clinking, wine refilling like fountains. But to me, it all sounded distant, like I was submerged in water, watching a family I used to know through a sheet of glass. Melissa was holding court again, effortlessly slipping into the spotlight like it had always been hers. The dealership called the color Obsidian Midnight. Isn't that wild? I told Zach I wasn't signing unless they matched the interior stitching to my phone case. Everyone chuckled. Tyler followed with a humble brag about his quarterly bonus. Put most of it into an aggressive growth fund. Crypto is over. Real estate's where the returns are now. But you have to know where to look. I've got a guy. He winked at my dad, who grinned back, proud as ever. Every word they spoke had weight, presence. They filled the room like they deserved to be heard. Meanwhile, I sat with a paper napkin folded neatly over my lap and an untouched piece of bread on my plate. No one asked what I'd been working on. No one wondered how my fundraising campaign went, or if the shelter had made it through the holiday rush. My job didn't translate well into cocktail conversations, I guess. No big numbers, no prestige. Just lives changed, but quietly, invisibly. Then came the toast. Dad stood, slow, deliberate, glass raised high. To family, he began. To those who lift each other up, who make things happen. You know who you are. I looked at him, waiting for the rest, for a glance in my direction, a crumb of acknowledgement. Something. But he sat down, and I was still invisible. I stared at the dwindling contents of my glass, a gift from a waiter, not a family member, and felt something ancient rise in my chest. Not just sadness, not even anger, something deeper, older, like the grief that comes from being overlooked so many times that you start to believe you were made to be forgettable. I excused myself. No one asked where I was going. The restroom was empty, a sanctuary of beige tile and soft lighting. I locked the door behind me, leaned over the sink, and just stood there, not crying. I was too tired to cry. Instead, I looked at myself. 31, single, no children, no diamond on my finger, no headline-making career, just me, a woman trying to do some good in the world, measuring her worth in meals served, not stock portfolios. A woman who always brought something to the table, only to be told, in subtle and not-so-subtle ways, that she wasn't enough. I touched the corner of my eye, checking for mascara smudges. My reflection didn't blink. That moment, that aching, hollow, fluorescent-lit moment, carved something open in me. I thought of the little girl I used to be, watching Melissa and Tyler get praised for grades or trophies, while I hung back, quiet and helpful, never causing trouble, always waiting my turn. 31 years later, I was still waiting. And for what? A chair near the coat rack? Permission to speak? A compliment I'd already earned 100 times over. No, something in me shifted. Not dramatically, not like a movie, no slow zoom or swelling music. Just a quiet, final snap. Like a string pulled too tight for too long. I straightened, smoothed my dress, and exhaled. I wasn't going to ask for a seat anymore. I was going to take back the table. When I returned to the table, the air had shifted. Not for anyone else, just for me. I was no longer listening for their approval. I had detached, like a glass sliding out of a cracked frame. The waiter had just delivered the dessert menus, all leather-bound and embossed in gold like miniature relics of the night's performance. My dad, naturally, had appointed himself treasurer. He leaned in over his phone calculator, mumbling figures under his breath. "All right," he said, adjusting his glasses. "Let's break this down." Melissa lifted her chin. "I already covered the wine. 6 bottles, remember? And I got the deposit," Tyler added quickly. $350 up front to reserve the private room. Of course, my mother chimed in, placing her hand on my father's forearm, like she was lending him her executive assistant. "Brooke, dear, you just had the salad, right? So we'll factor that in. It's only fair." That word, fair, landed like a cold coin in my lap. I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. I just watched as Melissa opened the calculator app on her phone like a prosecutor presenting Exhibit A. Tap, swipe, her manicured finger assigning each of us a dollar amount like a tally clerk at an auction. Tyler offered a quick quip about how he'd Venmo his portion. Laughter followed. My cousin asked for an extra spoon for his tiramisu. My dad was rounding totals to the nearest dollar. And I sat in perfect stillness. The wine they shared, the entrees I watched pass me by, the stories about market gains and interest rates I'd never been invited into. I was a footnote on the receipt they were dissecting. I let them finish the math. Let them assign me a fraction of their self-appointed grandeur. And then, without a word, I stood up. There was no sudden gasp, no hush. My chair didn't even scrape the floor. I made sure of that. "I'll be right back," I said quietly. No one asked where I was going. The host's stand was a small podium near the entrance, lit softly, like it didn't want to disturb the ambience of the elite. The manager stood nearby, chatting with the matron, but turned when I approached. "Excuse me," I said, calm and composed, the adrenaline burning low in my stomach like a pilot light. "Could I speak with you privately for a moment?" He nodded, eyebrows gently lifted. "I'd like to pay the full bill for the Morrison party," I said. "All of it." He blinked. "That's a very generous offer." "One moment, let me check." He stepped into the system, tapped a few keys, then looked up. $2,183 before tip, he said. I slid my card from my clutch and placed it in his hand. My fingers didn't tremble. I had made peace with the cost, not just the money, but the years it represented. Add a 20% gratuity for your staff, I said. They've been impeccable. Of course, he said, stunned. And would you like me to bring the receipt? No, just one thing. When the bill comes to the table, would you mind thanking me? Out loud, in front of everyone. His lips twitched into a smile, part surprise, part admiration. Absolutely, he said. As I turned and walked back toward the table, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt aligned, steady, like a painting finally leveled after hanging crooked for too long. They could keep their toast. I was about to deliver a lesson they'd never forget, in silence and in full. The check arrived exactly 10 minutes later, like clockwork, but for once, no one seemed ready. The table had softened into that familiar end-of-meal rhythm. Forks scraped against porcelain as the final bites of dessert disappeared. Napkins were folded absent-mindedly. Conversation had turned casual, lazy. Tyler was mid-story about a colleague who tried to expense a yacht rental, and Melissa was still gushing about the car's self-parking feature when the manager approached. Not the waiter, not a server, but the actual manager. He walked with quiet precision, holding a black leather folio in both hands like it carried something more sacred than numbers. He stopped just behind my mother, who was reaching for her purse. "Excuse me," he said, his tone both gentle and firm. "The check has already been settled." A pause. My mother's fingers froze, mid-zipper. The manager continued, now setting the folio neatly in front of her. "The full amount has been covered by Miss Morrison." He turned to me with a small, respectful nod. "And on behalf of our entire staff, I want to thank you. It's rare to see such a gracious act. Your generosity tonight did not go unnoticed." There was a stillness that fell over the table like fresh snow, sudden, soundless, absolute. You could hear the champagne bubble popping from 3 tables over. Melissa lowered her glass mid-sip, lips parted in disbelief. Tyler blinked twice, like someone had just reset his entire mental spreadsheet. My father leaned slightly forward, as if he hadn't heard correctly. And my mother sat there, mouth half open, caught between a word and the loss of all her lines. Like a stage actor who suddenly forgot the next cue. No one moved. No one clapped. Not yet. And I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I didn't look at anyone long enough to burn the image into memory, but I saw it all. The shock. The recalculation. The unraveling of every story they'd told themselves about me. That I was small, passive, invisible. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to argue for my worth. All I said was this: I may not bring flashy gifts or hold a mic at every gathering, but I know how to value people. And tonight, I chose to value everyone here, including your waitstaff, even when you didn't value me. There was no anger in my tone, just clarity. Like someone holding up a mirror that had always been there, they just never looked. Tyler opened his mouth, probably to soften the blow, to joke it off or explain it away. But the moment had already passed. Applause erupted, not from my family, but from the neighboring table, where a middle-aged couple and their teenage daughter clapped softly, then louder. A woman raised her wine glass in my direction. A waiter nearby smiled without a word and gave me a subtle bow of his head. And for the first time all evening, I felt seen. Not because I paid, not because I made a scene, but because I stood up for myself without needing their permission, without asking for their attention or fighting for a seat that should have always been mine. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was delicious. It tasted like peace, like power, like something I'd never known I was allowed to have and would never let go of again. The night ended not with hugs or laughter, but with the slow shuffle of coats and forced goodbyes. No one suggested an after-party. No one asked for a photo in front of the towering pines wrapped in fairy lights outside the restaurant. Not even Melissa, who normally documented every family gathering like she was curating a museum exhibit, reached for her phone. They left in clusters, polite, clipped. My mother walked slightly ahead of my father. Melissa and her husband didn't wait for the valet. Tyler avoided eye contact as he gave a one-handed wave and muttered something about catching a ride. It was all so undramatic. They just dispersed like smoke in winter air, vanishing into the night. I stayed behind for a moment, standing under the awning as the last of the restaurant lights dimmed. The cold nipped at my collarbones, but I didn't shiver. There was something grounding about the quiet, the stillness after years of being talked over, the luxury of hearing my own breath. Back home, I changed into pajamas and poured myself a glass of the cheap red wine I hadn't brought to dinner. I sat on the couch, legs curled under me, phone face down, untouched. I didn't need validation, not anymore. But eventually, curiosity won. The first message came from Melissa, just 5 words. That was dramatic. Hope you're okay. No greeting, no warmth, just a flat attempt at control disguised as concern. I stared at it for a second before locking the screen again. I wasn't going to justify her discomfort. Then Tyler. Didn't expect that, but fair. It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest he'd ever come to admitting I had done something powerful. I almost smiled. And then, long after I turned the lights off, well past midnight, came the message I didn't expect. You were right, and I'm sorry. I forgot how strong you are. Merry Christmas, Brooke. From my father. 12 words, but one of them, Brooke, carried more weight than all the rest. It had been years since he said my name with intention. Usually it was sweetie or honey, words that felt affectionate but distant, the kind you use for someone you filed away into a vague category. This time he saw me, not as a daughter he pitied or dismissed, not as a placeholder in the family dynamic, but as a woman who stood tall, who paid the bill and the price for being overlooked. And somehow, that quiet recognition, even if late, was enough. I didn't reply, not that night. Instead, I leaned back into the silence, a silence I had once feared, once filled with overcompensating, with desperate attempts to prove I belonged. But peace isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a room you leave on your own terms. Sometimes it's a message sent at midnight from a man learning to unlearn. And sometimes it's the stillness in your chest when you realize you no longer crave their applause. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need a mic drop. I didn't need them to weep at my feet or rewrite their narratives to fit me in. All I needed was to remember who I was and act like it. Not with ego, not with rage, but with quiet, unforgettable grace. And that, more than any gift, any praise, any seat at their table, was the best thing I gave myself this Christmas. A seat at my own. And finally, it was enough.